As a poet, actor, and playwright, Laura Burke also spent the last 10 years navigating the mental health system for treatment of depression and schizophrenia. She shares an insider's perspective on the strengths of our current system and the areas in need of dire improvement.
That I'm saying that, but there were some that I found that did seem to have some lasting effect. But at first, in my first scroll through all of these studies, I was finding nothing that was helpful. So I got a little discouraged and angry, and this is kind of what came out of it. I'm sorry, I'm not angry all the time, but this is... I rub my dry eyes as I stare at the dirty computer screen, scrolling down through effect sizes and control groups to find results. And the only statistically significant findings are the inflated numbers paid off by drug companies. Where are my brothers and sisters now? Lost in the land of crazy, while the only effort to save them is made to fill the pockets of pharmaceutical giants. Where are my brothers and sisters now? They are described in official literature as abnormal and their impossible to qualify experience called a deficit syndrome, a severe and persisting chronic and insidious mental illness. Where are my brothers and sisters now? They are dying inside after being disowned by family and friends while searching the streets for God at the bottom of a bottle of rubbing alcohol. They are locked in institutions if they are lucky, sedated, hopes decimated, no thought given to the important incubation period of psychosis. After all, Moses talked to God, and he wrote the most followed piece of literature in Western hegemony. Why is praying socially condoned while one step beyond becomes reason enough to call someone broken, damaged? Well, what about the cracks where the light gets through? Isn't this type of delusion just one step closer to fantasy than the safe falsehoods we all turn to? Where are my brothers and sisters now? Perhaps some of them, the lucky ones, are sitting in classrooms like me, quiet and terrified of giving themselves away as their psych professors describe the hopeless and disabled face of the entity they intimately do battle with every day. Shame washes over them and hardens like clay, while they wonder if no one will ever get their act together and offer cognitive remediation so they can remember what they read, if someone will help them to rediscover how to feel so their minds stop taking them to the edges of bridges and tall buildings. This part I will try with everything I've got, because I know that inside each and every one of my brothers and sisters is a human being, a resilient, wounded healer ready to stand up and spread the compassion they have learned through the irony of their oppression. Where are my brothers and sisters now? They are ready. And so am I, even though I am terrified of how far inside someone's eyes I may have to search for the line to their heart. I see my own hollow death in each flat, apathetic gaze. But my recovery means nothing if I emerge from the depths alone, and like me, we will need to humanize what we most fear if we want to face our own exaggerated humanity. I have not been spared to hide my past and forget. So follow me. We're not out of the woods yet. Thank you. Looking back, depression was always the lens through which I viewed the world. I grew up a melancholy, oversensitive child and became an easy target in elementary and junior high schools. The first time I held a razor blade to my wrist, I was 11 years old. While I found one seeming solution to working with my sadness, quite an adaptive gesture actually, I developed anorexia, and I was able to gain control over some aspect of my life and make decisions about what I would or wouldn't eat. It helped me literally shrink my body, but it did not shrink the size of my suffering. So I forced myself to gain back the weight. Slowly, feebly, I walked into my high school doors, a once again inconspicuous weight, hiding the dull depression from which I had never truly healed. It took a chronic pain disorder and the surrounding despair and anxiety at the age of 19 to bring me to a therapist where I found validation and antidepressants. I began slowly but surely to heal. The road was winding and I got lost a few times, ending up having relapses of major depression when difficult life events came along. Unfortunately, when I moved to Montreal to do my undergrad, the waitlist for a psychiatrist was so long that I ended up suicidal in the ER before I was finally able to get access to care in my new city. Sadly, as many of you know, this is one of the only ways to get into a day treatment program if you haven't already done a stint in a psychiatric hospital. However, day treatment is the place where I began to understand the concept of peer support, although I didn't know of its official title at the time. I simply propped myself up with the support of the other people who, like me, were struggling, were human, and not ashamed of it. And there was the occupational therapy, pottery, and goal setting, the psychiatrist who trusted my own judgment enough to choose my own medications and who met with us several times a week. In addition, he offered neuroscience lessons every Thursday afternoon on the workings of mental illness in the brain and how certain medications act for those who were interested. I can't say that day treatment works for everyone, but it did for me. I was finally highly emotional, a little neurotic, even melancholic, but I was relatively well. I was doing well in school. I was enjoying the once or twice a week of stand-up comedy I got to see for free through my best friend who worked in the clubs in Montreal, which, by the way, is an excellent tool to help with depression. And I was what I would call recovered. And here is where the ironic part comes in. I had spent all of these years trying to manage my intense emotions, and then slowly they began to disappear altogether, which was strange. This had never happened to me at any other point in my life, and I was kind of freaked out that I, the girl who cries at long-distance telephone advertisements, now felt completely untouched by heart-wrenching dramatic films. Well, then I started to be unmoved by real-life events. I was unnerved, but I didn't want to be a complainer until I was on the bus one day and I heard the most beautiful organ music playing. It was 10 minutes in that I realized that it was not being played on the bus driver's radio or anyone's iPod. And a few minutes after, I frantically began this investigation as to its origins. It faded out. My GP at Concordia Health thought it must have been a side effect from withdrawing from my antidepressant, so I left her office, a bit relieved, but it continued. More music, then voices, then full-on three-dimensional multi-sensory hallucinations. I managed to get in to see psychiatrists in Montreal who all said, nope, that's not how psychosis begins, which I was starting to assume was the cause, as the internet searching I had done seemed to lead me to draw such conclusions. They saw my dark circles, my frantic demeanor, my rapidly dropping weight, and they said I was anxious and that anxiety can cause a lot of weird things to happen. I would usually buy it. I desperately wanted to buy it until the next series of hallucinations came on and until I became highly confused, started to lose my ability to read, write, understand people, and speak with consistent fluency. Then I thought, okay, enough. I was no longer able to do my schoolwork, so luckily I had a sister and a mother who drove to Montreal to get me, as I was not well and not getting adequate help. I came home to Nova Scotia, and I saw a psychiatrist here I had seen before. I seemed flatter and slower, yet not depressed, and not at all manic, and this ruled out the bipolar type of psychosis my grandmother had had years ago. So, sadly, my doctor began to entertain the borderline possibility. Now, many of you know that once that label is even mentioned on your chart, your voice ceases to be heard by most people working in the mental health system. And that's a radical thing to say, but I think most of you know it's true. I guess I can't blame my doctor. I mean, I was feeling numb inside, and for a while I enacted the ironic stance of getting pretty hysterical about the fact that I could not feel, and I ended up a few times in hospital for suicide attempts. Again, doctors in rural Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, near where I was living, were unable to detect the psychosis I was developing, but because I still had what is referred to as insight into the fact that I was ill. And then entered into the wellness program at Nova Scotia Early Psychosis, a program where we did yoga, kickboxing, CBT, nutrition, cooking, and spoke with a spiritual caregiver. It was phenomenal, again, partly because of peer support, and because this initiative was based on the premise that people get better. I also managed to see a psychologist there for a short while, and go to education sessions with other young people to help us to feel a sense of agency in our own healing. Firstly, more psychotherapy could be useful for people with major mental illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Psychosis is traumatic. Readjusting to life afterwards is challenging. Maybe there is some neurochemical basis to these disorders, but resiliency and an ability to return to normal functioning increases with psychotherapy and psychosocial treatment, as many of you know. Creative arts therapies in particular are sometimes helpful where traditional talk therapies fail or can serve to complement them. And that's evidence-based too. That's not just me going, hey, I want to get hired. Secondly, and I'm guilty of this too, often in the system, one healthcare professional will see one piece of the treatment puzzle and say, that's what it is. And another sees another piece and says, that's what it is, when it would be most helpful to work together to see the whole picture. and they are both right. It sounds simplistic, and luckily, it is. Okay. And it may be too much to ask some psychiatrists to start with an I don't know mind, but maybe to start with an I don't know everything mind. If one of the doctors in my visits to hospital and doctor's offices in my first stint, in the first 6 months of my psychosis, had taken that stance, I would not have been seen as a round peg in their square diagnostic criteria, and I might have gotten help before I was once again taken to the edge of suicide. But like pioneers and revolutionary thinkers in all cultures, one has to take a journey into unknown territory first. For one, psychiatry, although essential, does not replace the wisdom of having worked with one's own mind on the level that peer support workers have had to. With their complementary expertise, they could also be leaders in the healthcare world because they get it. And they are examples of healing in the face of many voices which say it is possible but don't really expect it. Intended for their essential and powerful healing role, but peer support is like the oldest type of healing on earth, shamanism, where one who has transcended common perception of reality or suffered in some extraordinary way steps into their suffering and beyond it to help others. Peer support is, in a way, a resurfacing of some very important and ancient aspects of healing. We don't necessarily need one more nurse, a different psychologist, a more cooperative, compliant patient. We need a bigger view. We need a systemic shift in purpose and a return to awareness about the reasons why we are helping these individuals who are struggling. In helping them, we help our larger society. If we propagate insight and not neurosis, we create more wisdom and resiliency. How we treat our sickest people is how we treat ourselves, and vice versa. They or we do not need the paternalistic categorical problem solver of old. We need people who can see past our struggles and remind us of our own healing capacity and wisdom, our own unconditional value underneath all of our supposedly wrong views or behavior. Remind us of our agency and dignity, and we will rise to your challenge.